which is still, I think, have experienced. I think a lot of them have played Champions League football, but World Cups and being together in groups I think that's the big tester. When you're in the same camp for 3 weeks, a gang of guys, there's a lot of personalities flying around, and I think that is the big, it's not the ability of the players, I think it's the mentality of the players that deal with big competition.
He was gutless. That's what Mark Hateley thought when the phone rang and the voice on the other end tried to bribe him. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because before we get to football's darkest betrayal, we need to understand something about the man they called the target man. Mark Hateley didn't just play football, he went to war. And when you live by those standards, when you demand excellence from everyone around you, you make enemies. Today, we're exposing the 5 footballers Mark Hateley absolutely hates, and the stories behind each name might surprise you. Let's start where most people wouldn't expect, with his best mate. For nearly a decade, Mark Hateley and Ali McCoist were inseparable. They weren't just teammates at Rangers, they were a phenomenon, the target man and the poacher. Standing 6'3", Hateley occupied defenders and knocked balls down. McCoist, with the sharpest positioning in British football, feasted on the scraps. The numbers tell the story. In 1991-92, they combined for 57 league goals. The following year, 78 goals. Rangers won the treble and went unbeaten in the Champions League. They shared everything: social circles, horse racing, the adulation of 50,000 fans every week. This was Brotherhood. The answer lies in February 2012, when Rangers entered administration. The club was dying. McCoist, now manager, found himself in an impossible position. Rangers were demoted to the 3rd division, playing against part-time opposition, and from the outside, Mark Hateley watched with growing horror. The breaking point came in 2015 at a League Cup draw. Hateley openly questioned the fitness levels of McCoist's squad, suggesting the players weren't fit to wear the Rangers shirt. McCoist was devastated. He'd sacrificed everything steering the club through its darkest period, and now his best mate was taking cheap shots from the commentary box. The communication stopped completely. Total silence. Hateley claimed he didn't have McCoist's number. That's where they were with it. The hate wasn't really about fitness. Hateley hated what Rangers had become, and McCoist was the man in charge. Years later, the ice thawed. When McCoist received an OBE in 2024, Hateley was supportive, but the years of silence remain a defining wound. If the McCoist story was a slow-burning tragedy, the Stuart Kerr incident was a violent explosion. March 16, 1997, Parkhead, Rangers versus Celtic. Rangers were chasing 9 league titles in a row. Hateley, now 35, had been brought back for one reason: his psychological hold over Celtic. The match was scrappy. Rangers led 1-0 through Brian Laudrup. Then, in the 66th minute, everything went wrong. Following a scramble in the Celtic box, Hateley found himself entangled with goalkeeper Stuart Kerr. Kerr was 22, an emerging talent, and he refused to back down. Words were exchanged. Then Hateley snapped. He thrust his head toward Kerr. The intent was clear. Referee Hugh Dallas showed red. To Hateley, this wasn't about losing his temper. This was about hierarchy. The veteran striker expected the young goalkeeper to know his place. Kerr's willingness to challenge a man who'd scored winners in the Milan derby wasn't bravery, it was insolence. Hateley regrets the red card because it put his team at risk. Rangers held on to win 1-0, but it could have gone wrong. Yet, he maintains coldness toward Kerr, viewing his reaction as soft compared to the hard knocks he took against defenders like Claudio Gentile. The hate is visceral. It's the memory of control lost, provoked by an opponent he deemed unworthy. For Kerr, the incident defined a career cut short by injury. For Hateley, it was the final act of his Rangers career, a violent punctuation mark. When footballers retire, old rivalries usually soften. Former enemies become colleagues, sharing microphones and memories. But in the case of Mark Hateley and Chris Sutton, the microphone has only amplified the hostility. Chris Sutton reinvented himself as the shock jock of Scottish football media. He labelled managers dunces, called performances embarrassing, and stated certain Rangers teams were unfit to challenge Celtic. Hateley took the opposite approach. Writing for the Daily Record and representing Rangers as an ambassador, he saw his role as defending the institution. He viewed Sutton's style as clickbait designed to humiliate. The core of Hateley's hatred lies in professional respect. He believes former professionals shouldn't cross certain lines. Sutton's relentless disparagement of Rangers crossed that line repeatedly. The flashpoints came thick and fast. When Sutton claimed Rangers players weren't good enough to lay a glove on Celtic, Hateley took it personally. He publicly rebutted Sutton, calling his comments nonsense and accusing him of kicking a giant while it was down. As Steven Gerrard began rebuilding Rangers, the feud intensified. Sutton remained sceptical, constantly moving the goalposts for what constituted success. Hateley used every platform available to highlight Sutton's bias, framing him as a Celtic cheerleader rather than an objective analyst. Sutton fired back, accusing Hateley of being a Rangers cheerleader who blindly supported the board regardless of reality. Hateley countered that Sutton was a contrarian who would say anything for attention. The Scottish media thrives on this dynamic. The old firm binary is a commercial product. Media outlets monetize the tribalism. Sutton plays to the Celtic gallery, Hateley plays to the Rangers gallery. Everyone makes money, but Hateley's disdain appears genuine. In interviews, his tone when discussing Sutton shifts from professional disagreement to personal irritation. He views Sutton as a symptom of modern media culture that values controversy over insight. The hate here is intellectual and professional. Hateley hates what Sutton represents: the erosion of the player's code in favour of the shock jock algorithm, the willingness to say anything, no matter how inflammatory, for clicks and ratings. To Hateley, who grew up in an era where respect between professionals was sacrosanct, Sutton represents everything wrong with modern football media, and unlike the others on this list, this feud remains active. It's ongoing warfare, fought with columns, tweets and sound bites. There's no reconciliation on the horizon. If the Sutton feud is about media noise, the Neil Lennon conflict is about history itself. It's a battle over legitimacy, integrity and the validity of sporting achievement. February 26, 2012, Rangers had just entered administration. The club was docked 10 points by the Scottish Premier League. This effectively handed the title to Celtic, who were already leading, but now faced no mathematical pressure. That day, Hateley wrote a column for the Daily Record that ignited a firestorm. He wrote, "Congratulations, Celtic. This year's title is yours, and even though I believe it's tainted, that's none of your concern." Tainted, one word that would define the relationship between these two men forever. Hateley's argument was simple. A title won because your opponent was handicapped by administrative penalties rather than beaten on the field carries an asterisk. He was delegitimizing Lennon's achievement before the trophy was even lifted. Neil Lennon, Celtic's manager, did not let it pass. His response was visceral and personal. He called it pub talk. He attacked Hateley's intelligence and credibility. He said someone in Hateley's position should know better, that the comments were disrespectful and inflammatory to Celtic supporters, the club and his players. Lennon called Hateley embarrassing and bitter. He accused him of banging the Rangers propaganda drum. His defence was that Celtic had been the better team regardless of the points deduction. They eventually won the league by a margin that exceeded the 10 points deducted anyway. But for Hateley, the damage was done. To him, Lennon represents Celtic's dominance during the years Rangers were in the wilderness, from 2012 to 2016. Hateley refuses to acknowledge those years as a fair fight. He views Lennon's celebrations and rhetoric during that period as graceless. For Lennon, Hateley represents the arrogance of the Rangers establishment, a refusal to accept defeat or admit they were bested. Instead, they resort to excuses about tainted circumstances and asterisks. This exchange established a permanent state of hostility. The two men represent the polarised extremes of the Glasgow divide. Their hate is fuelled by the sectarian and political undercurrents that define the rivalry. It's not just hatred of the individual, it's hatred of the narrative the individual tries to enforce upon history. This is an ideological war that will never end. There's no middle ground, no compromise, no reconciliation. Hateley and Lennon will go to their graves believing they're right and the other is wrong. Of all the figures Hateley hates, Scott McGarvey occupies the darkest category. This isn't a sporting rivalry or a media spat. This is a criminal allegation. It involves the betrayal of friendship for money and the theft of what could have been the pinnacle of Hateley's career. The year was 1993, the inaugural Champions League season. The format was brutal. 2 groups of 4 teams. The winner of each group went straight to the final. No semi-finals, no second chances. Rangers were in a group with Marseille, Club Brugge and CSKA Moscow. Going into the final matches, Rangers and Marseille were neck and neck. This was Rangers' moment. After years of domestic dominance, they were on the brink of European glory. Hateley was the most feared striker in Europe. Everything was aligned. Then the phone rang. Days before the crucial match against Marseille, Hateley received a call from an intermediary. He identified the man as Scott McGarvey, a former teammate from Portsmouth, someone he considered a friend. McGarvey was acting on behalf of French interests, linked to Marseille's corrupt owner, Bernard Tapie. The offer was simple, a large sum of money to feign injury and not play in the match. Marseille knew that removing Hateley was their priority. Without him, Rangers were beatable. Hateley refused immediately. He was incensed by the very suggestion. How dare McGarvey, a supposed friend, a former professional, approach him with such a proposition? It violated everything Hateley believed in. But here's the cruel twist. Fate intervened anyway. Hateley was sent off in the preceding match against Club Brugge for a minor scuffle. A controversial red card that meant he was suspended for the Marseille game regardless of the bribe. The match ended 1-1. Marseille went on to win the group and then the Champions League final. Rangers went home with nothing. But the story doesn't end there. Shortly after, the Valenciennes affair broke. Marseille player Jean-Jacques Hateley admitted to bribing Valenciennes players to throw a league match. Bernard Tapie went to prison. Marseille was stripped of their French title, though they kept their European crown. Hateley's suspicions were vindicated. The corruption was real. The fix was in. Why does the hate run so deep? 3 reasons. First, the stolen final. Hateley is convinced that had he played, Rangers would have beaten Marseille and reached the Champions League final against AC Milan. He views McGarvey as the agent who stole his career's greatest potential achievement. Second, the personal betrayal. McGarvey wasn't just a contact. He was a friend. To sell out a former teammate for a cut of a bribe is, in Hateley's eyes, the ultimate sin. Third, validation. Decades later, McGarvey was filmed in the Daily Telegraph sting that cost Sam Allardyce the England job. He was caught discussing how to pay bungs to managers. For Hateley, this confirmed everything. McGarvey was morally bankrupt, always had been. This is the hatred that keeps Hateley awake at night. Not the on-pitch battles or the media wars, but the knowledge that corruption, embodied by a man he once trusted, robbed him of footballing immortality. Before we finish, there's one more name we need to mention. Brian Clough. He's not one of the main 5, but he's the architect of everything that came after. In the early 1980s, Hateley was a young, raw striker at Nottingham Forest. Clough, the idiosyncratic genius manager, didn't rate him. In a meeting that Hateley has recounted hundreds of times, Clough delivered a line that would define Hateley's career. "You're not a footballer." Clough believed Hateley relied solely on size and lacked the technical intelligence to play for his side. He sold him to Portsmouth, a second division team. It was a rejection that cut deep. But Hateley's reaction wasn't to crumble, it was to fight. He told Clough to his face, "I know you're a successful man, but let the coach manage the team." Then he went out and proved him wrong at every level. From Portsmouth to AC Milan, from Milan to Monaco, from Monaco to Rangers, every step up the ladder was a mental middle finger to Brian Clough. When Hateley outjumped defenders to score the winner in the Milan derby, establishing himself as a Curva Sud icon, he felt vindicated. When Fabio Capello praised his ability, Hateley contrasted it with Clough's dismissal. The hate for Clough is the foundational myth of Mark Hateley. It's the grit in the oyster that created the pearl. He hates the comment, he resents the treatment, but he implicitly acknowledges that without that rejection, he might never have developed the armour that defined his career. Mark Hateley's hate list isn't random. It's a structured map of his professional values. Each name represents a violation of the Hateley Code. Ally McCoist violated standards, letting the club Hateley loved decline. Stuart Kerr violated respect, challenging his physical authority. Chris Sutton violated dignity, commercialising disrespect in the media. Neil Lennon violated legitimacy, trying to rewrite history. Scott McGarvey violated loyalty, choosing corruption over honour. And Brian Clough violated belief, doubting what Hateley could become. In exposing these figures, Hateley is defending his legacy. He's asserting that the way he played the game, with physical force, unyielding standards, and total commitment, was the correct way. Those who opposed him, betrayed him, or criticised him were on the wrong side of that moral line. The target man never forgot, and he never forgave.